right, thank you everyone. Welcome back. This is our second event of the day for the Indigenous Futures Research Center Symposium. And just before we begin, for today's second event, the IFRC and ForeSpace would like to acknowledge this morning's shooting in Mistissini Cree Nation. It's located approximately 600 kilometers northwest of Quebec City. We extend our deepest condolences to the families, loved ones, and community members affected by this tragedy. We invite everyone here and online to observe a moment of silence as we collectively mourn and hold space for those impacted. Thank you. I want to welcome everyone back into this space, and all of you here online. Here to moderate our second conversation is Assistant Professor of English here at Concordia, Liz Howard. I hand things off to you, Liz.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Liz Howard. I'm a settler Anishinaabe initially from Chapleau, Ontario on Treaty 9 territory. And I am ancestrally in a process of reconnection to Dikmeksheng Nishnabek on Robinson Huron territory. And it's my honor to be moderating this panel on cross-disciplinary research within the First People Studies program with Doctors Sigwan Thivierge and Gage Diabo. And I invite each of you to introduce yourselves.
Skanazoagwegu, Gage Karahkwi Diabo Ujats. I'm a Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk scholar from Kahnawake, the reserve community just south of Montreal. My pronouns are they, them. I teach in the English department and the First People Studies program here at Concordia. I've considered myself rather old school insofar as I've written a paper to deliver for today as classic conference paper. Talking about books. I got into the field because I love books and movies and music and responding to art. And so you're going to hear some of my analysis along those lines today. So Nyawagoa.
Gwe, everyone, Kakana, Sigwan Indigenous. I'm Anishinaabe, also from the other side of the colonial border. I'm on the Quebec side. My community is Long Point First Nation. It's 500 or so kilometers northwest of here. And so a little bit of a long way from home too, but still somewhat close at least. I am assistant professor here at Concordia in the First People Studies department. And like Gage, I am cross-appointed in another department program in linguistics. And so that's my cross-disciplinary intersection there. I am also a nerd. I loved reading growing up. And I was also really interested by the language aspects of it. So I think we do have a lot in common. My approach to language, though, it's more along it's a bit more of a scientific, technical, pattern-based kind of approach. I was trained in the field of generative linguistics, which is very, very Western. And so since coming here at Concordia 4 or 5 years ago by now, most of my work has been kind of unlearning a lot of values that I learned in the field of linguistics. And so I'm trying to decolonize a little bit in that way too. And so that's another element to the cross-disciplinary aspects of my work that I'll also get into once I start talking about my actual research program that you can kind of get a hint of in this slides here on the other side of the room. But that's kind of me. Language, how many ways can I go about it, and how can language and the theory of language kind of help and work together to bring back languages that we have lost or in the process of losing a little bit, or stem the loss a little bit.
All right, the title of my paper is The Voices Yet to Come, Haudenosaunee Futures in Alicia Elliott's And Then She Fell. It starts with an epigraph, which is a quote from Gatsi Tsagwas, Ellen Gabriel, where she writes, "We're told in the Longhouse that what we do today impacts 7 generations from now. All of us have roles to play in protecting the land, all our relations, and fighting for the rights of Rodrigo Sadaji, the faces not yet born." So as promised, I'll be speaking today about a futurist novel that I've been writing about currently, and that I've had the pleasure to assign as a reading in 3 of my courses so far. So alongside my brilliant students, I've been thinking about the novel on a number of levels, principally how it functions as an adaptation of the Haudenosaunee creation story through a speculative horror lens. But today I will focus more on how it works as a story that teaches us about the future and how we perceive it, about how we listen for futurity, as I've written in another paper of mine. So Mohawk Tuscarora author Alicia Elliott's novel, And Then She Fell, is both a Kanien'kehá:ka internationalist and futurist text. It dramatizes, if not literalizes, a key principle in Haudenosaunee political and spiritual practice, that of making our decisions in terms of what impact they might have on all of our relations, in the present tense, but more importantly, in the future, for the next 7 generations. In the epigraph to this paper, taken from the book When the Pine Needles Fall, Gadzitzakwas Ellen Gabriel uses the term Rodrigo Sadaji, the faces not yet born, to describe how we as Kanien'kehá:ka imagine our futurity. When I heard Gabriel speak about this principle at the fall 2025 book launch of the French translation of When the Pine Needles Fall, she juxtaposed the centrality of these faces not yet born with what she described as a problem of resentment towards the youth in our communities. Too often, Gabriel explained, we have come to view children, who are quite literally our futures, in negative terms, as a personal or a financial burden, or as failing to meet the standards embodied by the elder generations. She decried these resentments not only as contrary to our ancestral principles, but as an existential threat to our future as Kanien'kehá:ka. Instead, she argued we among the middle and elder generations must re-embrace our roles as caregivers, teachers, and nurturers, not just of the current younger generation, but of the 7 generations yet to come. This present-day ambivalence towards the younger generation and the generations yet to come, as stressed by Gabriel, is central to the intervention made by Eliot in And Then She Fell. Her novel dramatizes and to an extent makes literal the Haudenosaunee principle of thinking 7 generations into the future by imagining a scenario in which the voices of those future generations come to bear a direct influence on the decisions of her protagonist, Alice Dockstader, that she makes at crucial moments in her life as a Mohawk woman and as a mother and as a storyteller living in present-day Toronto. In a prior essay of Eliot's titled 32 grams per dose, she explains that Haudenosaunee have always believed in the principle of 7 generations. When you make a decision, you must consciously think about what effects that decision could have on your descendants 7 generations in the future. This world does not belong to you. You are merely borrowing it from the coming faces. Meanwhile, Onondaga Seneca knowledge keeper Oren Lyons connects this imperative to both the Ahondu-Gariwadekwa that we heard from Hannah Klaus this morning and the Gayanaragoa, the Great Law of Peace, writing of these sacred instructions, when you sit in the council for the welfare of the people, think not of yourself, nor of your family, or even your generation. Make your decisions for the 7th generation coming, so that they may enjoy what you have here today. If you do this, there will be peace. Lyons also speaks to a central metaphor of seeds and planting that permeates both And Then She Fell and Haudenosaunee culture more broadly. Our leaders, he says, on page 31 of this essay, were instructed to be men of vision and to make every decision on behalf of the 7th generation to come, to have compassion and love for those generations yet unborn. We were instructed to give thanks for all that sustain us. We were told that the seed is the law, and we will continue to plant the seeds of life. In the Haudenosaunee story of creation, of which And Then She Fell is a contemporary adaptation, the seeds in question are those grasped by Odzizagayu, Sky Woman, as she falls through the crater left by the Tree of Life, and which go on to form the basis of plant existence here on Turtle Island. In And Then She Fell, which makes passing reference to Haudenosaunee women as seed keepers like Alice's mother, The seeds are also of a metaphorical nature. They refer, as Eliot writes, to those coming faces that reside in our futures, generations down the line. The intervention that Eliot makes in the novel is a challenging and provocative one. It asks that we open our ears and expand our notion of temporal perception, to listen actively to the voices of those faces yet to come, to the children who are the literal and metaphorical seeds of our people's futurity. Now, from its opening pages, the novel is concerned intensely with the faculty of listening, principally as it is exercised, often imperfectly and even impossibly, by Alice Dockstader. I observed that at least 3 narrative voices are used to tell the story of And Then She Fell, all of which are present in the prologue. And they include a third-person external voice that speaks very cruelly of Alice throughout the novel, a first-person voice belonging to Alice herself, and a second-person voice that gets introduced later in the book that belongs to Alice's future granddaughter, Edie. The first voice opens the novel on page 1 with the lines, "Alice never seemed to hear the microwave beeping, not even when she was 3 feet away from it, feet propped on the kitchen table as she painted her toenails neon green." The narrator of the novel's prologue is harsh in its admonitions. From page 2, quite simply, Alice deliberately chose to ignore what she didn't want to hear, either the most teenage of all ailments or the most human. For who wants to hear it, the incessant hammer banging down on one's carefully constructed version of real life? These opening details establish a few things about Alice's characterization, and more subtly about the multivocal mechanics of the book itself that point to the challenges of listening in radically trans-temporal ways. I argue that the voice of the prologue's narrator, that third-person voice, is nearly identical to the voice that taunts Alice in the middle and main portion of the novel, which is otherwise narrated in Alice's first-person I. A key example of this confluence of voices occurs on page 228, when Alice imagines, hallucinates, or hears her cousin Tanya telling her, "Anyway, it's nothing you don't already know. Your dad tried to warn you about academics, and your ma tried to warn you about white boys. You wouldn't listen. You never listen." In this moment, it strikes me that the novel's past tense, which includes the prologue and most references to it thereafter, is shaped almost entirely by this self-admonishing external third-person voice. And what that voice reiterates on several occasions is a kind of doomed prophecy for Alice, that she will not, and therefore cannot, listen properly. The things that this voice expects Alice to listen to, though, range from the mundane to the normative, recursive, and even damaging, namely the mechanical beep of the microwave marking the passage of clock time, and the seemingly self-directed accusatory messages that belittle her and her perceptive capabilities. This voice seems driven to set Alice up for failure in the novel's central project of better attuning her, and we as readers, to the possibilities of listening, to cite Mark Rifkin, beyond settler time. In line with that accusatory third-person voice, Alice's supposed inability to listen properly also gets weighed negatively against that of her white husband's, Steve's, acute perceptivity. Alice characterizes Steve on page 31 as the type of person who listens deeply to everything everyone says to him, remembers the tiniest, most otherwise inconsequential details of each conversation, then asks them about it whenever he sees you next, whether that's in a week or 6 months. Now, Steve is a complicated figure in the novel for reasons that I cannot unpack at length here, save to point out that he, in the main timeline of the novel's events, what actually happens on the page, is a textbook example of what Stolo musicologist Dylan Robinson calls a hungry listener. Steve's capabilities to listen to others and to remember superficial details have 3 key qualities. They are transactional, extractive, and they are bound to the past and the present. He recalls what has been said by others in and about their pasts only in order to empower and enrich himself in the present moment. A crucial detail is that Steve is an anthropologist who met Alice as a byproduct of interviewing her seedkeeper mother for an academic project. Again, Alice characterizes that process a little too generously. From page 39, it also helped that he consulted her mother on every detail of his book. listening closely to her long circular stories without interrupting, then deferring to her judgments. While Alice emphasizes that Steve paid her mother for these stories, which seems ethical enough, it is unclear in her descriptions of his total deferral to her judgments whether he is adopting this passive stance in the spirit of ethical non-interference or merely as a way of abstracting and minimizing himself as the extractive anthropological voice in the equation. If the relationship between Steve and Alice's mother is indeed dialogic, then it is a dialogue in which the former seems determined to remain hidden in the shadows as a passive observer, rather than an active participant, neither affirming nor complementing the exchange of story in any meaningful way. A positive contrast, meanwhile, to Steve's hungry listening emerges via Alice's Aunt Rachel, who by Alice's account is the sole figure in her life who doesn't think of her or of the radically perceptive women who came before her as quote unquote crazy, a word that gets recycled dozens of times throughout the text. Aunt Rachel is the only person to whom Alice feels safe revealing that she, as a teenager in the aforementioned prologue, had a dialogue with the haunted figure of Disney's Pocahontas through the television screen, with a figure later revealed to be the voice of her yet-to-be-born granddaughter, Edie, speaking to her from the future. Rachel, quote on page 134, listened intently as I told her the whole story and reassures Alice of the reality of her perceptions by citing her grandmother as an example. Quote, your grandmother wasn't crazy and she didn't have a mental illness. She was a medicine woman. She could speak to spirits and see the future. It's not something to be scared of. It's a gift, unquote. The act of listening is reciprocal here, with Aunt Rachel hearing Alice's whole story and following up with her own wisdom about the role that listening to the future has played in their family's history. Now, whereas Steve's self-effacing, hungry listening and the doubtful third-person voice in her head compound to convince Alice that what she's hearing, revealed later to be literal voices from the future, are false and that she is, again, crazy for hearing them, Aunt Rachel, we learn on page 135, was making space for her to feel somewhat normal and differently loved, even though Aunt Rachel, too, betrays some underlying fear and distrust of what Alice is perceiving. Given the novel's placement within the horror genre, a genre in which communions with the spirits through television sets and Ouija boards are depicted almost exclusively as scenes of terror, it is noteworthy that the underlying affect for Aunt Rachel remains that of fear. Despite the safety and trust she otherwise strives to project for Alice, Aunt Rachel, and this is very relatable, I think, for all the reassurance she can provide, is still an imperfect listener too. But that doesn't preclude her capacity as a caregiver and a nurturer in other senses. As I head towards wrapping up, I want to return to the novel's central twist, which I realize I'm trying to celebrate this novel and maybe get y'all to pick it up yourselves while also spoiling a major part of it. But that the voice that speaks to Alice at various points, first through a haunted DVD copy of Disney's Pocahontas, is in fact that of her yet-to-be-born granddaughter, offering wisdom and guidance from the distant future. The twist, as it were, consolidates the past, present, and future of Alice's family into a retelling of the Haudenosaunee story of creation that Alice is depicted as writing throughout the novel as a creative project for herself. At first, Alice believes that she is merely appropriating her late father's storytelling voice. From page 139, it's nothing new, she insists. It's the same story my people have told throughout centuries with a slightly more irreverent tone. A tone, it occurs to me with shattering clarity, that you stole from your childhood conversation with Pocahontas. She's your narrator, or your interpretation of her is your narrator. You didn't even come up with that yourself. Stealing from a cartoon character and your father and parading it around as creative or unique. Upon rereading the novel, though, with the knowledge of the time-traveling twist, this passage can be construed not only as foreshadowing, but more importantly as the revelation of the key to the novel's intervention, as far as radically trans-temporal acts of listening are concerned. Alice's storytelling voice that we experience throughout the novel, she realizes, albeit only partially in this moment, is a fusion of her father's way of telling the creation story with the bratty and irreverent tone that she hears from her granddaughter Edie via that haunted DVD. While Alice thinks she's stealing from a possessed cartoon character, she is in fact listening to, learning from, and channeling the faces yet to come, the voices yet to come. When Alice goes as far as to label Edie as your narrator in the second person, we as readers are attuned to a provocative idea about creation and storytelling more broadly, that the ones who will tell our stories are not ourselves, but those who come after us, that we do not own our own narratives, but that the coming generations do. Most of us will never get to meet those future narrators, certainly not 7 generations down the line. But in And Then She Fell, we are given the opportunity, to paraphrase Cherokee Nation scholar Daniel Heath Justice, to imagine otherwise. In the final second person section of the novel, we turn to granddaughter Edie as an adult in an unspecified future. While imprisoned by the Canadian state for her work as an internationalist and as a land defender, Edie follows in the footsteps of the women who came before her in her family to effect an act of transtemporal listening. With the help of a cockroach named Pete, for cockroaches are not only futuristic survivors in the novel, but time travelers as well, Edie learns to reach through time to see multiple possible timelines that might befall her grandmother Alice, and finally to speak directly to Alice at those key moments that we've previously seen in the novel. Scenes that were before depicted as horror now shift at this point to resonate instead as comforting scenes of kinship across the generations. The central metaphor of seeds also returns to the forefront when Edie and Alice, the former's identity now revealed to the latter, share the following exchange on pages 310 and 311. Your father's stories were a seed he planted in you, and even though he isn't here to see how that seed's growing, it still is, isn't it? Yes, Alice replies. Your writing will plant seeds too, says Edie. That's why it matters. You have no idea what decision of yours, what seed is going to grow into a sturdy, powerful tree generations down the line. Here again, the connections between past, present, and future, as well as between the creation story and the process of storytelling, are embodied in the image of seeds becoming trees. The seeds are, on the one hand, the Rodigo Sadaji, who will carry on the fight into the future, and on the other, the kernels of knowledge that will sustain those coming generations. So the seeds in question are not to be hoarded, as with Steve's extractive approach to Indigenous knowledge, but to be planted, to be re-embedded within the soil, nurtured, and allowed to flourish. This seed-to-tree metaphor invokes but ultimately pushes beyond notions of endogamic heteronormative reproductivity, insofar as the accompanying image of the tree that stands tall generations down the line cannot be reduced to the literal span of a human lifetime. Stories and teachings are the sturdy, powerful trees that will outlive us and continue to sustain the Rodigo Sadaji in future times we can scarcely imagine. They protect us. They share, if not deliver, the air that we breathe, offer us nourishment, and bear witness to lifetimes beyond our own. Some stories, like the Haudenosaunee story of creation, beget entire worlds, nations, and ways of being. Others, less ambitiously yet no less crucially, give us the inspiration to live and fight another day. Nyawagoa.
Miigwech Gage Nyawa. I have a lot to go. I'm writing on me going second after this. Okay. I will do my best though. What time is? Okay. And so Miigwech again, and thank you for coming and listening to us talk about the nerdy things that gets us up and going throughout the day. And so I'll talk about my interest now. Okay, there it is. And okay. So I'll start from home. This one here. And so this is one of my favorite places at home. It's my grounding spot. That's where I go to visit when I arrive, and it's the place that I make sure to visit before I leave again, because it's months usually in between my visits home. And like I said earlier, it's a bit far away. It's about 600 kilometers northwest of here. The region is now called the Bitsibit-Temiskaming, even though both of those words come from our language. And I've been gone for a while. I was raised there up until I was about 11, 12 years old. And then I was taken out to be put in school in Val-d'Or, Quebec. And I never really went home. For the years after that, I went home more and more, but as the years went by, it was less and less. And so I'm reconnecting for sure. And this is a little bit difficult if anyone who's also in a reconnecting position kind of knows and experiences. And like most of us in my position too, I'm not a speaker of my language. My grandparents are both fluent. My mother can understand pretty well. She's not able to speak the language as well. And then me, I'm the linguist, right? I know the patterns, but I don't necessarily know how to speak it. And so a year ago, I started learning my language and learning how to kind of speak it on a daily basis. It's still kind of hard to talk with people, but I talk a lot with my cat. And so that kind of helps me keep my knowledge of my own language going because I'm an adult, right? I'm learning this as supposedly a fully grown human, but it's still difficult, right? When we learn languages, the language that we kind of know by instinct by now, regardless of what that language is, we usually acquire it when we're kids. And so for me, learning my language now as an adult, it's a little bit more difficult. But this is important work for me to be doing, and it is part of my research. I consider it part of my work because this experience goes back to when I was a child, right? Like I said, my grandparents speak the language, and I heard them talking a lot when I was a kid. They're probably talking about me. And so I'm sitting there as a 9-year-old, and I'm like, why can't I understand my grandparents? Why doesn't anyone else speak this language, right? None of my friends really spoke the language either. And so I was like, where? Where can I learn this language? And I went to school and I realized, we have classes there. But no one's really speaking it outside of these classrooms. And we're learning how to count to 10 and the names of animals here and there. But the combinations, the sentences, that I can't really learn at home. And it doesn't seem like a lot of us are learning that either. And so what can I do? How can I help bring it back? And so 20 years later, at least maybe like 10, 15 years or so after this time, I started my undergrad in linguistics, and I'm done my training by now. I'm a faculty member here at Concordia, but it's been 15 years that I've been in this field. And during my journey throughout that field, there was a lot of wandering, I think. And now that I'm in this position, I feel like I finally found a way to come back home. Because looking at my route and my path, I did work on my language up until my master's degree. And then when I started my PhD degree, I still kind of paid attention to it, but not really. I was mostly working on Georgian, which is not a language that's connected to mine at all, spoken on the other side of the world, different contexts, different people, different stories. And it's only this year, actually, that I can finally say that my research is actually useful and could be valuable for my community and my nation. And this is scary to kind of say this in front of people, you especially, everyone that I kind of tell my story to, because it's a big jump, right? I'm a professor in First People Studies, and when I applied for that position, this wasn't all of me, but this was still like the core of me. My CV described me this way, as a theoretical syntactician working on Georgian. And so thinking back on my processes now, or my journey, the ways I was thinking about where I was going to go and why I was going to go there, I know now, looking back 4 years ago, that by applying for this position in First People Studies, I was actually looking for a way back home. I felt like I knew the field of linguistics fairly well, and they still carry a lot of the knowledge and training with me because it's still useful. I still need it. But the basis, the grounding was not for me, not for home. And so I went home. And by this time, it had been years since I'd been back, because it was 2021. It was the middle of COVID, and it was also 5-10 years after my educational journey. It was just so much harder to go back home. And when I went back, my immediate questions were like, okay, I might have been taken out of my community. And so I didn't really have a choice there, but I did have a choice in staying away, especially when I was in my early to mid-20s. And so I had to ask myself, why? And these are very difficult questions to ask, and they're very difficult questions to answer for myself too. because I really had to relearn how to be myself. I had to connect with my teachings again, connect with my family. And for anyone who has to kind of manage generations of trauma being handed from parents to children and to grandchildren and to great-grandchildren, this is a lot that I have to deal with. And so in a very, very real, sometimes frustrating, very often emotional way, my career and my life journey are one and the same. Right? My research program and my life, the Venn diagram between these two aspects of myself, they're a circle, they're the same thing. And it's why I have to kind of talk about it in this sense too, in the context of my research program. And this is also very important for me, and so I'm going to share this little bit of a story because it also kind of lays the groundwork for why I kind of talk about myself and my research and why I go about my research in this way. And so this is from the summer of August 2022. It was the first time that I had gone back home after starting my position here. And this was on an island that my uncle built a cabin on when me and my cousins were all children. And I spent weeks here growing up, like 2-3 weeks at a time, easily. And so it has a very special part, a very special place in my heart. And my dad kind of brought us out there, him and his partner. And I was wandering around by myself while they were cooking fish on the shore. And I saw this feather, this eagle feather, off to maybe like 20-30 feet away. And I was really shocked when I saw this, because I was like feeling brand new Anishinaabe, even though I was in my early 30s by this time. And I recognized it immediately as an offering, as a gift. And I didn't know much by that point, but I knew that a gift comes with responsibilities. And recognizing this gift, I knew at least the sense of what kind of responsibilities I would be accepting if I accepted this gift. And in August 2022, fresh out of my PhD, realizing that I had a lot of work ahead of me, a lot of things to unlearn, I didn't feel ready to take on these responsibilities. And so I sat, I prayed, I left tobacco, and I did not bring the feather with me. I left it. And so 2 years later, my dad decides to bring me back, and we go back for another trip, and we're out on the same lake for another 2 weeks or so, for a full week actually, and we didn't have any internet connection at all, and I was starting to go crazy, because I'm like, I just, from my phone. And he's like, we're gonna go get your feather. And I'm like, the feather's not gonna be there, Dad, it's been 2 years. And he's like, it's gonna be there. And I should have had faith in him, because of course I go, and I'm like, look, it's not there, and they're both laughing at me, and Kathleen, his partner, is like, well, dig around. I'm like, oh yeah, pine needles. It's been 2 seasons of pine needles falling, of course it would cover it. And I start digging, and at first I feel, as you can kind of see on this picture here, I feel the stem of the feather first. And like I feel a shock go through me, because I was convinced that this was not going to be here, because I felt kind of guilty at this point that I'd been offered a gift and I rejected it. But I went back anyway, and my dad and Kathleen, neither of them were shocked that this feather was still here, because they knew it was still waiting for me. And I was the one who was surprised. But this time, looking back on everything and having 2 years to kind of sit with this self, with my decision back then in 2022, and having gone through 2 years of reconnection work, this time I took it, and I accepted the gift, I accepted the responsibilities that came with it, and I still have this feather, it's at home. And it's been cleaned, and it's something that I look at every single day, and as a reminder for myself of the work that I'm doing and for who specifically. Because at this point in my career and at this point in my life, I have gone through the academic system, I have played a little bit of the academic games, I know what the academic goals are, and I know that in most fields, the normalized research practices, the methodologies, well, what we do is we collect data from under-researched communities, and then we present the results of that research to each other. Right? As a linguist, I know this very well. I've sat in so many different talks and so many different conferences where our languages are all over the place in very fine detail, but we are not in the room. And even if this is not happening in academic spaces, then the audiences that we're typically talking to about the results of our research, they're not the people who we're working with, right? They're not the participants, not the collaborators, right? It's other highly educated people like us, or government bureaucrats, or people in these positions. And so the work that I do now is not for them. It's not extractive research processes. I try to avoid extractive methodologies as much as I can. The research that I want to do now is more in the lines of insurgent research. And what this means, as we can has been implicit, I think, throughout the symposium so far, throughout these last couple of days, is it's grounded, right? The research that we do, the connections that we have, the strength of what we do, it's supported directly from the communities that we are part of. And that's a specific way of talking about it, right? To be part of a community means that you're there, you're maintaining those connections, you're sustaining those connections as if they were your own family. And you're coming together to support and manifest those values in a way that makes sense and is useful to everyone. And like I say here too, in these bracketed parts here, right? It's not enough to just be working with the community or to be a member of the community. You have to make sure that those relations are actually strong. And so this is where my reconnection work comes in too, because even though I am a member of Long Point First Nation, Winaway and my family are still there, because of my 20-year gap, there's only so much that I can do so far. And the reconnection work, the getting to know my family again, that is part of my work, that is part of my research program. Because what I do at the end of the day, it's my work in linguistics, and I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm actually doing in a second, but it's grounded in our worldviews, right? It's not grounded in the linguistics way of looking at languages and how we think languages work. The work that I do, it's not meant to progress or advance generative linguistic theory. It's meant to support my home. It's meant to support my cousins so that they can speak with our grandparents, right? It's for them for my work to be useful for the people who want and need to speak our languages again. Right, the way that I go about it, it's responsible to us, it's responsible to my cousins, to my families, it's action-oriented. Right, there's nothing in here about a CV, nothing in here about getting tenure actually, right? There's very few games that are being played in an ideology like this because it's nation building, right? It's not for a curriculum or something like that, even though we use curriculum. That might have been a bad example. And so just to tell you a bit more about something that I've been doing, and this is super recent, right? This is only in last semester, at the beginning of last semester in September 2025. And I had been working with two former students of mine, one current student of mine, Arlo Price, and a former student of mine, David Danos. They're both undergrads. David is now a master's student at UQAM in history, and Arlo Price is a linguistics undergraduate student here, just started, and from Kitigan Zibi, which is a sister community to mine. And together we all kind of contribute our own distinct, unique expertise and skills in a particular area. So I bring the linguistics, the theory, the patterns of our languages. Arlo brings the language itself, they're a fluent speaker. And David is not a member of any Indigenous community, but he has tons of experience with learning languages as an adult. And so he kind of brings the activities, the way that we approach it. And Arlo brings the grounding, and I kind of bring other things. But we're all bringing our own. And we're adapting this approach that's called the minimal course approach that was created for another Algonquian language. It's very different than ours, but we've seen it working for them. And so we wanted to see if it will work for us. And we realized that, oh my goodness, it is. When we started last semester, we didn't really anticipate that we were actually gonna have a cohort of people. We thought it just might be us three, maybe one more. But we started off with 6. And then over the course of the semester, more and more people joined the course, joined the class. And even the people who joined halfway through, they were able to catch up immediately, very, very quickly. And this is kind of taking place along the same time as the work that me, Arlo, and David started on our own, because we had been working together for about a year already. And so as we were kind of creating this more beginner level class, we're also co-creating some intermediate level curriculum. And when it was just the 3 of us kind of practicing together, but we're all kind of like running around trying to find time to pick up these conversations back up again. But we were able to talk to each other fully in the language for 45 minutes to an hour after maybe a year of learning. And so there's something in this approach that we're doing, bringing together at least 3 strands of learning, 3 fields coming together so that it's effective and we're learning and we're speaking to each other fully. And so just to say a little bit more and try to frame the work that I'm doing as research, because it is research, even if the goals and the way that it looks like is not necessarily a traditional way of looking at it. David is, right, he was one of my students, and Arlo is currently one of my students too. And I am currently Arlo's teacher, because Arlo is taking FPST 310 with me, which is the course I'm teaching right now. And so there's a very much an exchange of knowledge, an exchange of teaching and learning, regardless of position and age. Right? There's an exchange of knowledge that's breaking down a lot of the hierarchy that's inherent to an institution like this. And when when David and I first met Arlo, it was in another class. And like most classes, it was vocabulary heavy, which makes it really hard to learn how to create sentences, right? Because I can know the words, but I won't necessarily know how to combine the words. And so that's one of the things that our class is trying to emphasize a lot, because we know that there's dictionaries, there's databases, there's word lists everywhere. And so we're trying to emphasize the combinations. And like other classes, and our class too, right? It's hard. This is a time commitment, it's an energy commitment. It can be very hard to come out for 2 to 3 hours every single week. But what we found is that the way that we have structured our classes, even if you can only come every other week or so, it's fairly easy to keep up. And so our content, what we're learning about, what we're talking about, there's still progression. And even if you come late or even if you come new, there's ways for you to catch up. And so that we're continually growing in our knowledge of our language. And we have a community. Right? One of the hardest things about having people come back to any kind of language classroom, it's what adult wants to go sit in the class. Right? It's easier for me because I do this full time. I do this for a living. I like being in classrooms. But for others, like, I get it. I know that it's hard. It does take time. But I think it is this community, this friendship, these relations that we've been able to establish with each other that does keep people coming back. And the fact that they get to be able to speak to each other in full sentences after a class, one class, that doesn't require any linguistic training whatsoever, right? The patterns are still there, but they're shared in a way that's implicit so that you can pick it up without me needing to be like, this is a verb that's animate and transitive, right? I don't need to use the fancy labels in this particular lodge space. And the people who are in our lodge space, right, 3 of them are reconnecting to their communities. 2 of them are Anishinaabe, and 1 is part Potawatomi. And Potawatomi is a different language than ours for sure, but it's very close. It's very closely related. And the 3 of them, I measure the success of our program by their success. And so the fact that they are, do I say it here? No, I don't. Okay. Well, the fact that they are some of our strongest speakers, that they are not shy to speak and to have fun and to sing in the language too, that tells me that what I'm doing, this insurgent research project, it's on the right track. Right? Even if the university itself is like, well, is this really research? I'm going to be like, yes, it is, because it's working. It's for people. And so just to say a little bit more about the other students who are in our program too, and then I'll stop talking. It's a mixed audience, students. So we do have Indigenous people who are reconnecting and some who aren't. Also, there are some directly from community who don't know the language because of language displacement. And some of our students are not from Indigenous communities, but they are in the linguistics program. And what I've noticed with them is that when they come to our space and our lodge, that kind of affects their grounding a little bit. And what I saw with them is that they directed their learning and they combined it with their own linguistics training that they have gotten over the past 1 to 4 years, however position they are in their program. And they start transcribing songs. They'd start doing the linguistic analysis of songs and stories that already exist. And so just for example here, this is a song that came out last year in October, November or so. And this is what we're given in the lyric booklet, right? Where we have the Anishinaabe version on the top, the sentence, and then we have the translation on the bottom. And most of our resources and materials, regardless of language, they look like this. Right? And what makes it hard what makes it kind of, there's a space for me as a linguist to help here, because just looking at the Anishinaabe sentence, I don't necessarily know what Unijani itself means, or what Chi means, or Nanotagazi means. But with the linguistics method, and just excuse me for the technicalities here, But now I know, right, by doing this kind of analysis and pattern recognition, now I know that Onijani refers specifically to the female moose. And that's cultural knowledge too. That's not knowledge that any one of us can kind of find very easily, because it's a very traditional name for some of our relatives. Now I know that Chi is a shortened version of Giche, which means great or large or big. And I know that Nano Dagazi is also a creation, a construction that's a little bit complicated, right? This redupe part of the gloss means that it was a reduplicated part. And so together, Non Dagazi by itself means call a certain way, but now Na Non Dagazi means they're in the habit of calling a certain way. And so that's what the reduplication means. But by seeing the pieces, or seeing how the sentence, this construction has been created, how the pairs of form and meaning have been combined in a particular way, now that gives me a bridge between the sentence at the top and the sentence at the bottom. Right? And this is very detailed for sure. There are other ways of going about it so that it's not quite so linguistic-y. But there's something here, I think, and this is part of what we want to keep doing also, keep creating new recordings of stories for this transcription analysis kind of way of learning. And this is something that I'm learning from our neighbors and relatives down to the south of here also. So this is coming from Kahnawake with a collaboration between the linguistics department at McGill and the language learning school that's down in Kahnawake. And it's kind of the same idea. All of our communities, we might have resources like the video on the left and looking at the boxes, the purple box on the right. Ignore the bottom 4 lines at the moment, but the same thing, right? We have the Ganyangeha version on the top line in bold, and then we have the English translation right below it. And by itself, I could learn, I could ask people, I could definitely figure out how the meaning of he was freaking lazy is expressed by the Ganyangeha version. But looking at the bottom, the next 2 lines, right, it's not so technical, this one, but it's a lot easier to kind of realize then that, oh, this first word that I can't really pronounce, I don't know Ganyangeha sound patterns that well yet. But I know now that specifically, that word means he is freaking lazy, right? And everything else has another meaning to it. And for most people, I think those two lines specifically is good enough to help with the learning, to help with figuring out the patterns so that I can create new sentences to express things that I want to express in my own language. The bottom 2 lines, the particularly nerdy people like me, that's what we can keep doing, right? And that's other knowledge in there too that's very, very detailed that we still need to know. Because there's a process that went into he is freaking lazy in the second line, in the first line too. And the third line, or the first of the bottom 2 lines tells you exactly how that was created. And so this is kind of along the lines of how I'm working, and have several other slides here that I won't go through. But this is kind of how I've been combining the training that I've gotten over the 15 years of my career, but also grounding myself in where I come from and who I come from also. Because there's knowledge here, I think. And the last thing that I'll say also is that this kind of knowledge, this linguistic knowledge, like I have here with the technical lines with the symbols that's hard to kind of get a handle on without 4 or 5 years of linguistic training. This is everywhere, right? Again, if I go to a linguistics conference, it's very often the case that I'm going to find something of our languages. And there's an Algonquian conference that's been going on for like 56 years by now. It's been every year. And so all of our knowledge is out there. And when I came in a while ago for the last bit of talk, there was a discussion about museums and how we have to bring back our relatives and our relations that are currently being held in museums. And for me, when I look at linguistics, it's the same feeling that I get. It feels that in the Algonquian Language Conference, that is a big museum that has been going on for over 50 years where our languages are, and we're not there. And I've heard stories from some of us, Indigenous peoples, who do go there, and then we're kind of pushed out, right? Because it's linguists who are running things, and it's the linguists who feel that they are the experts of our languages, which is not the case, right? We need to bring them home. We are the experts and keepers of our languages. And so that's what I'm trying to do 5 years into my career, and feeling like I've been unlearning and relearning a whole other program and degree since I started here. But this is it. You can see it's all very new. And so if you have any ideas or anything like this, please, I'm open to conversations and just open to getting to know you and making those other connections too. Okay, Miigwech, thank you.
Miigwech, Sigwan and Gage for those incredible presentations. And I have a few questions prepared here before we open it up for audience questions. And I really feel that this first question really anticipated much of what you have just discussed. So maybe I could direct this more so to Gage. But broadly, each of you teach within disciplines that come with their own pedagogical traditions. Have there been moments in your teaching where you felt called to teach differently, drawing on Indigenous knowledges or community-based practices?
I can say that I feel challenged at all moments in my teaching and held accountable by the Indigenous students who take my classes. Just yesterday, I was teaching my one course this semester, First People's Sacred Stories, and we were talking about a sort of canonical figure in Indigenous literary studies, who's a Muskogee Creek queer scholar, Craig Womack, and his notion of Indigenous literary nationalism, which is a school of thought that I was trained in as a PhD student that I've kind of taken for granted as the way to study Indigenous literatures. And I posed the question to the students about how they feel about this term nationalism, given that it has this very Eurocentric globalist baggage. And an Inuit student of mine raised their hand and said that they were kind of uncomfortable with the term nation, but more importantly, they were uncomfortable with the ways in which literary nationalism tries to pinpoint what makes the nation itself and tries to fix that and read literature into that. And that really took me back because it was contrary to how I was trained, and it challenged everything I sort of took for granted about how we do Indigenous literary studies. And so I'm still kind of figuring out where to go from there. And in a nutshell, I'm thinking more about literary internationalism rather than just strictly nationalism. Mm-hmm. But that's a conversation for another day, I think.
Thank you.
So pedagogy, yeah, I think I'm the same, or at least I've gone through similar experiences of having my Indigenous students be like, oh, you're being way too technical. This is very, even as recently as last week also. And I think it's part of my journey also to figure out how much of linguistics do we actually need. Because even though I feel more adjacent to the field now rather than in it, but I still bring a lot of it with me, and I'm still interested by the patterns. I'm still always looking at things, and I was preparing for my linguistics class yesterday, and I kept getting distracted because there was something in this chapter that related directly to my thesis, and I was like, oh, this proves my point. But that was so there's a part of it that's still me. And I'm very grateful when my students are like, this is not how we should be learning the language. We need to make sure that there are stories and songs and community when we're learning the language too. Because I very often go a little bit too much on the patterns, and I think there's definitely value in that, and there is use to that also. But they remind me that I need to make sure that it's not just about the patterns, because that's how I will inadvertently reproduce a lot of the values that I just kind of picked up from being in the field in the first place. And so, yeah. And so it's been going really good this semester with this particular class with FPST 310. It's the Algonquian linguistics course, which I should have said at the beginning. And there's a better balance this semester with that one. With my linguistics courses, I've been finding that it's the other way around, where my FPST side is changing the shape of my linguistics courses, and I think they're enjoying the change because it's very different. I encourage a lot of joy in what they're looking at. The way that linguistics is kind of taught, it's so abstract and very cognitive and very pattern based, and it's even though we have the language in front of us, so to speak, it's very rare that we actually speak it and listen to it and actually get to know it in a way that's beyond just the patterns. And so then I'm forcing to making them like engage with it and be there and get to know the language as a language, and also not forgetting about the speakers of this language. And I had this funny story last year where I ran into a student of mine who took a linguistics course with me, syntax. And she was like, I ran into one of your other students, and she was just describing the teaching style and in the classroom of who the student or friend was taking this course with. And she was like, this is Sigwan. Oh, it's only Sigwan teaches like this. And so I guess the point that I'm trying to make is there's the linguistics part of me that kind of comes over into the FPST side, and then there's the FPST side that kind of goes over into the linguistic side. And for a really long time, I was kind of uncomfortable with this because it felt like I was swinging from one side of the world, from one world to another, and I was like, I don't know how to be in the middle. But now I'm kind of feeling that, it's more like a braiding. But this is only this year. This is only like this month that I'm feeling this. And so I'm grateful for that. And I think it's making me excited also for the coming years to see how I will keep growing and how my pedagogy will keep changing with the students who keep me on the right side of things.
Thank you so much. Very exciting possibilities. Perhaps we should open things up to the audience if anyone has a question that they'd like to pose.
So for those of you here in this space, you can just raise a hand and we'll get a microphone to you. Those of you online, you can feel free to type your question into the chat, or you can raise your virtual hand and we'll call on you. Is there any questions in this space? I see one right here.
Thank you very much for this tour de force about Indigenous narrative, like a personal narrative and literary narrative. And I'm interested in how do you have ideas about the interaction of persons who are not Indigenous with Indigenous narrative, both with biography, with literature, and are there ways to access this? Just what have you discovered when in your teaching? And my second part of my question is, should there be spaces in non-Indigenous cultural institutions for Indigenous, like in libraries or cultural centers, where there's like an Indigenous space? Like, what do people think about that? I realize that wasn't the topic of but you're professors, so that creates a place for you. But you're, as Indigenous persons, as persons growing and nurturing Indigenous cultures and returning Indigenous cultures to their place or empowering them. What should we all be doing?
I guess to pick up on my own previous comment about Indigenous internationalisms, I think the answer to your question about where do non-Indigenous students or fans of Indigenous culture fit into the equation is that we're all relative outsiders to one another's as peoples. I speak with some expertise and authority as a Haudenosaunee scholar, but that doesn't mean I have that expertise or even confidence speaking about the Algonquian nations or the nations out west, like the Coast Salish nations. I see myself as just a member of one nation talking to other nations. And I think the settler students that I teach ought to feel the same way, that they're not fundamentally shut out from the conversation, but they just have a specific positionality within that conversation that's still valuable in some way. Even if you can't claim insider status, you can still participate.
I think my answer is kind of similar. For me, for FPS 310, this is, I keep bringing up this course because it's such a reflection of my career. Everything about my own projection, my own pathway is in the course itself, and it's an open course, and so there's no prerequisites for it or anything. And so I have many Indigenous students and I have many non-Indigenous students too. And with it being a language course specifically, I run into this question quite a bit, even if it's not me asking specifically, should someone who's not Anishinaabe be learning Anishinaabe when other people do and have asked it already. And different communities and different nations have different answers for it. And so I know, for example, our Haudenosaunee relations, it's they're, from what's been told to me anyway, there's a little bit more of a protection towards the language, that only people from the community within the citizens of the nation should be speaking the language, at least at a certain level and a certain level of fluency. Knowing how to understand, knowing how to say hello, say thank you. I think everyone should be learning these things. It's one of my dreams. I would love to just walk down the street and hear someone say "sego" or "nyawa" or "miigwech" or "kwe." Like, I would just love this. And it doesn't require any conversational level knowledge of the language either, but I think it's connected to an internationalism aspect of it, right? I feel like being able to greet someone in their language is a sign of respect, of recognition, that I see you and I will hold out this bridge coming together between nations, and here's my offering, kind of thing. For Anishinaabe communities, what I'm seeing most often is that there's more of an openness of having people learn the language, but there is still a little bit of a care, especially for people who are coming from settler communities because of the history of our languages, right? They've been taken away from us. And so that's part of why we have to have language classes and reclamation and revitalization in the first place. And for me, what I'm trying to do now is to acknowledge that tension and have people consider it and reflect on it, so that if someone is coming to learn the specific language, then to be aware of why and for what purposes. What will you do with this knowledge once you have it? Because it's, again, if I'm walking down the street and I hear someone say "Nagay Minawaz," and I'm like, oh, that person's happy, and then that's enough for me, right? It's something that I haven't seen or heard before. And that's specific to my community and my nation. There is much more of a sense of, it is for everyone, it is open for everyone, but be respectful about it and be careful with how you're coming to our language and why. And I guess that's, I think that answers.
Do we have any other questions? Yep, I see one here.
Hi, thanks both of you guys for your presentations. I think this question's maybe more for Gage, but I just wanted to hear you speak to what futurist literature, in your eyes, like, what is the power of that today, and what do you think, where do you think that's headed in the future, I guess, and where we can use that in different possibilities?
Right on. I know as an undergrad and even as an MA student, I never wanted to think about the future because it seemed like exclusively a scary thing. But as I matured a little bit and engaged with it, like global futurisms a little more, I started to realize that the whole point of thinking about futurity is to try to make that future less scary, to make it a livable, conceivable, imaginable place. And so I've learned to take some comfort even in the dystopian futures that often get depicted. Like Waukesha Grice's Moon of the Crusted Snow is a horror novel about a very possible, tangible, dystopian future that nevertheless has its comforts insofar as the Indigenous people in that book and the Indigenous people and Then She Fell survive. They find a way, they find a reason to continue the good fight. And so just existentially speaking, I think futurism gives us a reason to get up and keep doing what we do. Do you got anything, Sigwan?
For futurisms, I do think about it quite a lot, and I was thinking about it during your presentation, Gage, because in my line of work with language revitalization, like 7 generations down the line, that's when our language would probably be back. It takes so much time to get it back and to have our languages spoken outside of a classroom setting. Like, even for me, even though I go to my lodge every Saturday, it's a big reminder to myself, even every day, even to just to ask my cat, do you want to eat? Can we listen? Right? This is like, I have to do it. But, oh, I'm getting off. I lost my train of thought. This happens so much. It happens during class too. It's very embarrassing. But it's just, so yeah, 7 generations down the line, they will be the ones to be speaking. And even though I told a story about this in class last week, about a language revitalization reclamation story from another Algonquian nation, Southwest, the Miami peoples. And for them, they really started off in a really horror, worst case scenario kind of position where they had lost their last living speaker, fluent speaker, in the 60s. And so for 30 years, they were like, our language is gone. There's no record of it. We might have some prayers, we have a little bit of songs, names, but no speakers really. And so for them, that was kind of, extremely depressing. And for any one of us two current nations today, I think if we could even just think of ourselves as being in the same position, it's so sad and so heavy to consider. But for them, what they were able to do is, one of their citizens, Darrell Baldwin, he went off and got a training in linguistics. And then he met someone, another linguist who's not Indigenous, who was a PhD student at University of California. And that linguist, David Costa, he told the Miami citizen, the person, that there is documentation of Miami language, by the way. There's 300 years worth of it. It's just in the library at University of California. And so I know. That's there's something to be said there too, and another big conversation that needs to be had about why our records and our documentation of our languages are in colonial institutions and not back home. But still, that gave them somewhere to start off of, because then they were able to take the linguistic documentation, do the analysis, create lessons again, and then 10 years later, Darrell talks about how that the Miami citizen, the linguist who went and did a lot of the reconstruction, he talks about how he's never been able to dream in his language, which makes sense. I will never be able to dream in my language too, because I'm learning it as an adult. But his kids, he says, his kids can dream in the language because he hears them talk in their sleep. And this story was told 20 years ago. But I know one of his kids, I know Jared, and I know from talking to Jared too that he doesn't consider himself a fluent speaker. But there's enough of it, I think. He has the instincts, he has the no, say it this way. It sounds better if you say it this way. That to me tells me that there's something of acquisition happening there. And it's just the first step. And so this, it's like, I'm not quite answering your question. I'm going like a huge way around it, but that little bit of hope right now, well, I guess this is like 20 years ago, but that's enough for me to be like, okay, it can come back. It can come back with a whole lot of work, like decades of work, but it can come back. And it might come back slowly, and I might not be able to see the results of that. I will not be able to dream in my language, but maybe my cousins will. And if I ever have children, maybe their children will, or maybe they will, and maybe their grandchildren will. That's enough for me. It's enough for me to keep it going, because I'm okay with not being able to dream in my language, but that's an acceptance that I have done for myself. But for other people, I think I can keep it going for them. So thank you for asking us this question also.
Thank you. Miigwech.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, I see one here.
Thank you for absolutely fantastic presentations, so inspiring. I hear sort of from both of you a little bit of geek culture, one in terms of genre, the horror genre, but then also you just described yourself as a language geek. I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about what that can do in relation to Indigenous studies.
Being an Indigenous.
I'm going to have to stew on that one a little bit.
For Indigenous, oh my goodness. I have an easy example because I went to one specifically last October, but there was a screening recently of Star Wars: A New Hope in Anishinaabe.
Yeah.
And I went. I made a good amount of my students come out too, and I was just like, oh, we should have more of this. This is so amazing. There's like a lot of revitalization that goes into that too, that representation, and just having to translate our languages to refer to the things in the world itself also was an interesting process. I noticed that for Princess Leia, the translation for princess was Ogima Kwezes, and it's literally like leader, woman, small. And so it's like a small leader woman, small woman leader. And so it's like reframing, I think, a fantasy world through the lenses of our own languages. And I think that's an interesting, fun process. It's part of the joy of bringing back our languages too. And so this was not the super addressing your question, but I think it's somewhat related because in our lodge and our learning spaces, it's just in a regular room. And so it's kind of hard to keep track of things, but it's also, it forces us to be creative in making the space nice and fun. Like we make a lot of silly jokes and say a lot of silly things, and we make mistakes quite a bit. But I think it's in the mistake making and recognizing when we're making mistakes and the kind of funniness that leads to, that's keeping the joy alive, and it's keeping the learning fun also. It's just being able, I guess the nerdiness there is kind of like about the patterns itself, and then being able to recognize the patterns and play with the patterns. It's like, okay, anyone, I think. I'm not the only nerd in the room for that one, but we're all we're all having fun with it. And so, yeah.
That's all the time we have for questions today.
Yes, yep, that's, thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you all for your kind attention. And thank you, Chimagwech, Sigwan, and Gage, for your very stimulating offerings this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you to Liz for leading the conversation. Thank you so much for all of you in the space as well for your contributions. So again, we're closing up the live stream, but quick reminder that this conversation is already available on our YouTube channel if you want to revisit or share it. For all of you there online, we're going to keep that Zoom open all day. So we're going to take a short lunch break, and we'll be back with our next panel at 1 p.m. For all of you here in this place, please help yourself to some pizza on the other side of the screens. Thank you.